Thank you so much. And welcome back to Governance Week 2026, Day 5, as we focus on governance of groups and conglomerates on our general theme of governance in a volatile world. We just had a really tremendous presentation from Mr. Robert Riley, which was so far reaching and which really is going to have us rethink governance in fundamental ways as we look at how we evolve and govern our organizations here in the Caribbean region. And now we begin our panel discussions, and we start with panel 1, the topic governance at scale. Oversight across complex group structures. Our panelists are Sherice Arman from the Cayman Islands, Dereck Rajack, who is joining us. I think he's in Jamaica now. Saudia Persad, who is joining us from Guyana. And our moderator is Elizabeth Cox. So I'm going to introduce Elizabeth briefly, and then Liz would in turn introduce her panelists more fully. Liz, just letting you know it's going to be a shorter introduction than that very nice long profile we have in the agenda, which is shared with everyone. Elizabeth Cox is one of our directors here at CCGI. We are very, very happy to have her. She's been a long-standing member of CCGI, and she's also the CEO and Managing Director of Casper Investment Link, where she also serves as the principal consultant. That is an organization that is headquartered in Guyana with reach across the Caribbean and Belize. Liz has over 40 years of experience in management and insurance and is recognized as a strategic advisor, trainer, and dedicated to empowering organizations and individuals to achieve their full potential. I'm just going to go more towards a quick summary. Her career began at the Guyana and Trinidad Mutual Fire and Life Group of insurance companies, and at GTM, her dedication, loyalty, curiosity, all of which I can attest to, critical thinking skills, led to her rapid promotions throughout her tenure at GTM, culminating in her appointment as project manager. And she was later appointed manager of employee benefits and department. Honestly, Liz has done so much. She has served so many organizations. She is a very committed Rotarian. And as I said, someone who is really near and dear to us at CCGI, someone who has encouraged me tremendously as we have led this turnaround of CCGI. Liz, I'm very, very, very happy to have you. Thank you so much for making all the extra effort to be here to moderate this panel today. And I hand over to you.
Right. Thank you, Kamala. First of all, thank you for inviting me to moderate this session. It's unfortunate that I had to shift locations, but like I said, I hope that the background noise doesn't intrude too much in it. But you know what? Governance Week is going really great so far, and today's topic is close to my heart because I have been involved with a lot of family-owned businesses, a lot of conglomerates, and so that, I'm sure that the panelists would speak to very, very interesting points towards this topic that we are going to be addressing, which is oversight across complex group structures. I mean, I see it as a spider's web, interconnected but fragile, an orchestra where many players with one conductor, and guidance in terms of a lighthouse across turbulent waters. And I know that I don't want to talk, I want to hear from our panelists. We do have a distinguished group and quite accomplished group of individuals today, so I'll go straight into introducing our first, Mrs. Sherice Arman. Works with Maples and Calder, Cayman Islands as a partner, and this is in fact a bridge version of her portfolio and her CV. Sherice is a distinguished corporate and commercial lawyer with over 26 years of experience. She holds 2 degrees from the University of the West Indies, a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Laws, and a Master of Laws in Banking and Finance from the University College of London. Her practice spans banking and asset finance and comprehensive financial services law. She serves as the co-head of the asset and finance practice and head of the global shipping practice in the Cayman Islands, but still finds time to serve on many boards that contributes to national governance. in the Cayman Islands. She is consistently recognized in leading legal directories, where she has been praised for her excellent client service and in-depth knowledge of banking and finance, especially in asset finance. So that's Sherice for you. Then we have Dereck. Dereck Rajack is the Chief Executive Officer of Caribbean Information and Credit Rating Services. Dereck, I'm happy to actually see or hear someone because I've heard about CariCrest for the longest while. Dereck is a seasoned risk management professional with over 2 decades of experience in the Caribbean financial services sector. He has held senior and executive leadership roles for more than 15 years, guiding diverse teams across multiple territories. His expertise spans management, credit risk, and market risk. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Mathematics, first class honors, I might add, from the University of the West Indies, and professional designations including Financial Risk Management and Sustainability and Climate Risk from the Global Association of Risk Professionals. So that's Dereck for you. Then we have Saudia, brings a strong background in international relations and government affairs to her role as SGCC. She's currently advancing her expertise through a master's degree while actively engaging in community development. With extensive experience in the business support organization, BSO sector, and diplomatic missions in Guyana, she's a committed advocate for regional collaboration and growth. Her work spans business and social initiatives and includes business-to-business projects and policy advocacy. Beyond her professional contributions, she's a passionate local artist who integrates creativity and innovation into her leadership approach. So that's our distinguished panelists that we have on today. And I know the topic is a very juicy topic, so I'd like to get right into it. And I'll ask Sherice to start us off with her presentation and her thoughts on complex group structures, the oversight role. Over to you, Sherice.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to present to the group. I want to focus on a number of different topics here today. The architecture of the boards and their committees, the flow of information, how information flows from the operating entities up to the group structure and up to the ultimate chair of the group, delegation and how matters are delegated and reserved matters in particular are dealt with, legal entity governance and management governance and the distinction between the two. Because one of the big issues that we see is management and the governance structure having conflict. The other thing I think I would like to discuss is consistency and culture and how that culture is set where you have a larger group. I think that's probably one of the biggest things. And final thing I want to discuss is risk. How risk is dealt with from an internal control perspective, and where there are opportunities or risks for that to go wrong. If it's okay with you, I'm going to take us through that. Is that okay, Madam Chair? First point I want to talk about is the board and the architecture of the board. Where we have group structures and larger group structures, the issues that we face would be holding companies and where the governance and the board of directors of those holding companies see themselves within the group. Sometimes there's a real disconnect between the parent company at the top and the operating companies at the bottom. And it goes to the culture of the group as a whole, where you find the holding company is disconnected from the operations of the group, the conglomerate. You find that you can have a particular culture in one aspect of the group and a different culture in another aspect of the group. And it actually then affects the performance of the whole group. And we look to the overall governance to drive the culture throughout the organization and throughout the group. And the challenges that we face with that, where you have a number of different boards for each of the entities, the structure of those boards could actually affect then the performance of the group. The other issue that I generally see is the flow of information moving from one board to another, where you have a group structure which is multi-company group structure. You probably find what I've seen, and certainly my experience, is that you have people creating small little kingdoms within the group, where they don't want to necessarily share information, passing up through to other entities within the group and up to the parent company, and where you have that creation of my own little kingdom, that can be really destructive, I find. And everything I say is going to speak to culture. Everything is always going to go back to culture. Because the culture of an organization usually typically set from the top, but if you have very large organizations, sometimes it's very hard for the information and for the culture to be driven down throughout the group unless you have a very, very cohesive flow of information amongst all of the entities within the group and the various boards, especially where you don't have a situation where there's overlap between the board members from one entity within the group throughout the structure, feeding up to the ultimate parent. And that speaks to then the flow of information. I think entities need, and particularly large groups of entities, need to have a proper structure for how information and reporting is going to flow. Sometimes you spoke, Liz, about being parts of family conglomerates. Sometimes families tend to not have as formal reporting structures and flow of information within the group. You have different members of the family responsible for different parts of the organization, different types of businesses within the group, and there may not necessarily be a formal flow of information going up through the group and up to the ultimate parent, and again, could cause challenges for the group. How delegation is dealt with. Again, where entities within the group are not they don't see themselves as part of the larger group. Sometimes you can have challenges there where there is not that there's not a structure in place for the proper delegation of responsibility within the group. And again, it goes back to the reporting structure that I mentioned earlier. And then legal governance versus management governance. Again, sometimes where you have boards and entities within the group, people who serve on boards don't actually always understand the difference between management and corporate governance. And you always find situations where directors get involved in the management of the business and they don't understand their role as directors on the board. And so I find that sometimes that's a real challenge. You have one or two directors who feel that they need to get involved in the running of the business, the operations of the business. And when you have larger groups, again, can pose real challenges. You find sometimes, and particularly with independent directors, they're not always apprised of what their role is. Worse, where you have family groups, they all think they need to run the business. Everyone has an opinion on what's happening within the group, and they all feel, because they sit as a director of the company, they feel that they have operational oversight for what's going on within the business. And I think a lot of the times directors don't actually understand their role. Their role to set policy, to assist the CEO, to plan for the group, for succession planning and things like that. I mean, the prior presentation was excellent and spoke to a lot of this. But directors within, especially within some of these larger groups, don't actually always understand their role. What is the role and the distinction between governance and management is crucial for directors to understand and for managers to understand. I mean, I've sat on boards where the manager calls me every day. I mean, I'm an independent director, I'm non-executive, but he's afraid to make decisions without calling and saying, well, this is happening, what do you think? Now that can go both ways. It can be a good thing and it could be a bad thing. It can be a good thing because you have constant dialogue between management and the board. It can be a bad thing because you have management who's afraid to make decisions. And so getting that balance is always really, really, really crucial. And then culture. Um, we can't speak enough about culture because culture can make or break your organization. It can destroy your organization or it can make you the greatest organization in the world. That culture has to be set by the board and by the chairman in particular. If you have a weak chairman, your board is going to be weak, and you risk destroying your organization as well. If that culture will not flow through, the culture of confidence, accountability, responsibility, that needs to be driven from the top down. Your employees sense if you have a strong board or a weak board, and they will take advantage of that. I've sat on boards where the CEO has taken advantage of the fact that he has a weak chair because he then runs everything and don't feel the need to report to the board at all. And tries to push through things that he knows wouldn't get past a strong chair. And so people take advantage of it, and you open yourself as an organization up to all kinds of potential issues where you have a weak chair and therefore a weak board and a weak culture. That's my open presentation. I'll pass it over now back to the moderator.
Thank you, Sherice. So culture has come up again, and I always say culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner if you don't watch it.
Yes.
Dereck, it's over to you.
All right, let's just before you go to Dereck, we want to just give you some guidance to cancel the noise in your background. So control, just tell her very quick. It's just 2 steps, Liz. It won't be long.
Yes, so Liz, all you have to do is go into your Zoom settings. So if you don't see it at the bottom there, you might have to click more, the 3 dots there, and then click settings. Then go into audio. If you scroll down to microphone modes, under background noise suppression, you want to change the drop-down box from auto to high.
You unmute, right? So we are not hearing you at the moment.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So you had gotten those steps that control.
Yeah.
Okay.
Looking at auto profile, right? Oh no.
The control just
Yes, so settings.
Yeah, I'm down with settings, noise removal, suppression of background noise.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go. Lovely.
Magic.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Liz. Right.
Thank
so
you.
Thank you, Control.
All right, so let's hear from Dereck, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This session kind of reminds me of a saying by Mike Tyson. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And when we look at all the amount of stress situations and crises that have happened over the past few years, it's clear that the environment is throwing us repeated punches. And the true test of resilience for any organization today is really having a proper, strong, and independent governance structure that can adapt as an organization grows and how risk, capital, and information flow between the parts. So I'd just like to thank CCGI for inviting me to participate. My perspective today will come from my background in the financial sector, as well as my current role at a credit rating agency. So we know for a standalone company, managing shocks like what we've seen over the past few years is difficult. So imagine what it looks like for a large, diversified group. As companies grow and they add more entities, they operate in different countries, enter new industries, they are hit with the challenge of governance at scale. Because when a business is small, the board itself usually has a good understanding of the operations. It's easier for management to express and represent the material risks, and the board can more easily see what's happening. But we find that as a business grows into a more complex group, governance itself has to evolve. And the thing is, if the group grows or scales faster than its governance framework can keep up, complexity grows much faster than oversight, And it's in that gap that you have a lot of risk exposure. And we know in good times when entities are making money, we tend to become a bit complacent and ignore some of the underlying weaknesses. But it's when these crises hit that those weaknesses become very evident, and then you get intense scrutiny from your shareholders, from clients, and even from regulators. So governance is what creates proper oversight and provides the day-to-day direction for how a company operates and how risks are managed day-to-day. So where does it break down? So in a complex group, managing overlapping risks and shocks is tough. And there are a few specific group nuances that cause major problems when governance doesn't scale. One is visibility and concentration. So when a group spans multiple entities, it becomes hard for the board to see the full picture. And this lack of visibility can really result in certain concentration risks, and you end up relying on single suppliers, or you end up concentrated in a particular geographical area or exposure to different sectors. And this poor visibility also allows for operational failures to be masked sometimes. It can hide things like related party transactions, and it can allow for unauthorized risk taking at the subsidiary level to go unnoticed until sometimes it's too late and something big happens. Another issue is intercompany arrangements. So we all know when market conditions get tight, it's not uncommon for groups, for companies within groups to try to support each other. So sometimes a group will look at a strong subsidiary to support maybe the parent, or even a weaker subsidiary might get support through favorable terms to provide them some breathing room in stressed environments. But that shouldn't come at the detriment of the supporting entity. So the terms of intercompany transactions always need to be scrutinized, and if they aren't transparent, you could find that risks are easily hidden within a group structure. And then we have the popular matrix structure. So it's common for a head office to try to direct how things are done to keep consistent policies and practices. But you must have a clear structure so that the subsidiary knows exactly what they're responsible for. And if there isn't proper communication, like the previous speaker said, critical risk could slip under the radar. Somebody in head office might assume somebody at the sub is watching an issue, and the sub might think that somebody at head office is watching the issue, and nobody is actually paying full attention. So that's another risk that scaling exposes. And then there's parent versus subsidiary board tension. So, a subsidiary board cannot be just like a rubber stamp. Yes, the parent would like to have its policies and strategies cascade throughout the group, but they have to understand that there are local market dynamics that the subsidiary board is responsible for. So a directive, a new product, or something that works well in other areas of the group and other territories may not work well in all markets. So subsidiary directors have to be truly independent, and they have to have deep local knowledge so that when these strategies or policies are cascaded, they are adapted appropriately for the local market that they are responsible for. And also previously mentioned, but like family groups, family-run groups, they are always founder or family dynamics, things like concentrated control, weak challenges to the owners, key person, and succession risks. So if a group scales faster than its governance framework can adapt, things start to break down. It typically starts with unclear accountability. If no one is properly challenging the risk, internal controls start to fail. And one major risk for group structures is the risk of contagion, where localized or subsidiary-specific losses or risk can quickly escalate into group-wide financial, operational, or reputational damage. And we all know reputational damage has a lot of spillover effects. You could lose access to credit lines. You might lose top talent. You may come under regulatory scrutiny, and very importantly, you might lose your customers. So when we see these negative impacts, it's rarely because it's rarely because of a single bad decision or a single bad year. It's usually because the governance structure wasn't working well enough. to catch the issues early and then provide direction on how to address it. And there's a famous quote from Warren Buffett: it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. So that's exactly what is at stake when you have governance structures breaking down as these groups scale. So how do we address these concerns? So from a governance perspective, first we have to ensure that the group is governed as a whole. From a governance perspective, a board of a growing group can no longer rely on the physical proximity to the business. Information must roll up to the group board formally, and the board has to rely on independent functions like internal audit and risk functions to help with the oversight duties. The board can delegate authority, but they cannot delegate accountability. Next, you have to ensure proper subsidiary independence. So boards must protect the boundary of the subsidiary by ensuring that the local subsidiary boards have appropriate and independent directors who can actually push back or are not afraid to challenge the group or the head office if necessary. Third, we have to make the invisible visible. The group board must be able to see all exposures. So we must avoid burying material issues deep inside large board reports, because the governance implication here is huge. Transparent, practical reporting is what really equips the board to challenge management and to help them to direct resources effectively rather than just passively reviewing reports. And lastly, stay dynamic. Boards need to keep up with how business is actually being done with all the new and evolving risks. We need to plan for worst case outcomes, whether it's a financial shock, an operational disruption through like a hurricane or climate event. The governance requirement is that the board itself must ask hard questions. What happens if we have a major supply chain disruption? What happens if we have a cyber attack? How are we able to operate under these circumstances across our entities? So to wrap up, as a rating agency, we pay close attention to some of these issues that I raised. We actively evaluate management expertise, board independence, and the overall control environment. And we do this because we know that failures on the governance side have a direct material implication on the quantitative financial side. So as the old saying goes, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and the quality of oversight and governance ultimately dictates how well those weak links get managed and supported. So just to wrap, the market environment is going to keep throwing those punches at us, but a dynamic, well-designed, scalable governance structure is what gives a group the vision to avoid those punches coming and the resilience to absorb them when they land. So thank you, Madam Chair. I turn back over to you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Dereck. Your presentation really speaks to your experience in enterprise risk management. It came through in your presentation, so thank you a lot for that. And there's enough empirical evidence which suggests 70% of corporate governance failures in large groups stem from weak oversight of subsidiaries, not the parent company itself. So thank you so much. Saudia, we're on to you now. Let's hear from you. Thank you. Thank you, Dereck.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. You've done quite a great introduction for me prior. However, given the points that I'll be touching on for my portion of the presentation, I think it's relevant to give a bit more insight for everyone present on the organization that I represent. And that would be the Suriname Guyana Chamber of Commerce. And we are a bilateral chamber that serves members regionally and internationally with any interest in either Suriname or Guyana, or already established here and looking to expand further and need additional support. So in that way, we are quite a complex organization, which is possibly why Kamala thought we were a good fit for this panel. So thank you, Kamala, for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. I'd like to touch on 4 major points, and that would be empowerment. Secondly, adapting and being proactive to the needs and disruptions in the corporate environment. Partnership, and of course, building off of one of the first panelists, culture, of course, most importantly, I believe. With the structure that the Suriname Guyana Chamber has established, We are governed by a board of directors that is split 50% from Suriname, 50% from Guyana. And that in itself is complex, and it needs to ensure that all of the board members are perhaps of different opinions, need to for sure be aligned on the mission and mandate of the chamber itself, because we serve so many individual and unique clients and partners on a daily basis. So there needs to be a clear alignment with what the mission of the chamber is and the goals in serving each member specifically. Like I said, our board is governed by 50-50%. And touching on empowerment specifically, we are quite fortunate to be a small secretariat, but a very empowered secretariat, in that we are able to contribute directly to the operations and functioning of the chamber. And I find this important to touch on because in so many cases, in so many organizations, perhaps the CEO, the executive director, the managing director is more of a placeholder, and it holds more of an operational capacity than a true leadership capacity, because so much decision-making power is held and controlled by board members. And we find that this not only shows up in very slow decision-making processes, but also not being as action-oriented as and responsive and proactive as organizations need to be, especially, and this is speaking on a regional level and more specifically with regards to Suriname and Guyana, seeing the level of economic development that we are facing, we cannot be hesitant and we cannot be misaligned in our organizational goals and duties in this climate. So in that way, I think what is truly necessary for groups, companies, is to assess the roles of their directors versus the roles of their CEOs or EDs, and to ensure that there is a balance there and that there is a comfortability with the persons in that role to really take charge and to really participate in the direction of the organization more actively. And we see this commonly with a lot of the organizations and members that we serve. And it's something that we also impress very strongly on those clients as well. Taking us into the next point is being adaptive and proactive to the needs of the market and any disruptions to the market. And I can say operating across multiple borders, there will be disruptions from time to time. And as a chamber, it is not only important for us to stay ahead and stay adaptive to those changes, but also to advise and guide our members along the same lines. And I find it better to communicate what I'm saying when I give real examples. So I am going to lean on a few active examples that the chamber faces and deals with along with their members. And one of those is that Suriname and Guyana, we are sister nations, we are neighbors. But the trade between the two countries, it's nowhere near what it could be. There's millions of dollars in trade going both ways annually, but it's still nowhere near what it really could be. And the reason for that is that we still have connectivity challenges that we face, being that we only have a ferry going between the two countries, and it doesn't operate as efficiently as it needs to. While we are actively supporting our members in mitigating those challenges that crop up every time, there needs to be a shipment moving across borders, there needs to be official persons moving across borders. What we have worked with experts within our membership and within our board of directors to do is to put together a proposal where there is a stronger public-private management of that board for that ferry service. And we have since submitted it to both governments. So a bit of a bold move, but I do think it is a necessary one. In the long run, should the chamber, not be as actively involved in that process, what it will guarantee is that there is still an ongoing conversation. There is still dialogue, and that the private sector has a seat at the table for that ongoing dialogue, because the private sector is who are going to be actively facing these challenges as they try to pursue regional integration, regional collaboration. But then we still have the connectivity issue. So why not have the private sector themselves directly participate in mitigating those issues. So that is one example of what it means to be proactive within your own organization. And I will say a project like that, putting together that proposal, again, required a level and a balanced head among all directors on what the position of the members we represent is and how we want that to be perceived and our concerns represented. Along the lines of being proactive, one of the things that we do is ensure that our members are able to be platformed at many events and conferences. And in that way, we have been able to do some research on what's needed and what's missing from some of the events that we've participated in. And from there on, we've managed to put together the International Business Conference. And I say that because I do want to touch on that for the points of partnership and culture specifically. The International Business Conference, we're entering the fourth edition now, and it's really meant to platform Suriname, Guyana, and the region to international investors and to engage in conversations guiding topics such as compliance, how to enter the markets, investor opportunities, and to really educate persons, even expanding across borders regionally, on how they really fit in, and also the culture of doing business that they need to be aware of and also respect as they enter those markets as efficiently as possible. One of the most crucial discussions that we've seen at the IBC, again, I'm just drawing on this example that fits into partnership, is the topic of culture. And every year we talk about the culture of doing business across borders and the need for understanding and doing the groundwork before you enter new markets. And this is something that we advise the leadership of our members on a very regular basis, because we have boards of directors and entrepreneurs who know that they want to engage in regional expansion. They know they want to build partnerships. They have the capital to do so, but they don't understand the groundwork necessary for building trust and securing the best partnerships possible to do so. Of course, we also have local content to contend for, and that's something that's another conversation also. However, one of the things that we speak about is that there are always going to be investment opportunities. We have Guyana reaching record economic growth recently with a GDP of about 43.6% in 2024, and Suriname securing an FID of 10.5 billion US dollars recently. So we see that sector specifically, that growth specifically in the oil and gas sector, and trickling through the economy and creating amazing investment opportunities. However, it is not something that can be done virtually. It's not something that can be done in a day. We do the groundwork with those companies to ensure that they are actually on the ground and that they're engaging in those conversations to build the trust. That means continuing to strengthen institutions and their work locally. My apologies, I am just experiencing a connection issue. Just give me one moment while I switch over.
We are hearing you loud and clear still, Saudia.
Yep, thank you. Elizabeth, I might be having a similar issue to you, but all good moving forward. Yes, we are in the same jurisdiction.
We're hearing you clearly.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, so continuing on that, what we advise companies on is to do that deeper work when building partners locally, and of course to ensure that they are perfectly informed on the legal and tax structures of each market that they are entering. And for the final point, just reiterating that the strength of what culture plays in the corporate world, and of course operating across borders, it is very necessary to understand that as you enter different markets, there is going to be a new and adapting business culture, and how you choose to navigate that really is a testament to how your company will continue to progress. Like I mentioned, it is very important to do that groundwork and to understand and respect the business cultures of the markets you are entering, and to ensure that you are informed and that knowledge sharing goes all the way through your entire team. It is not just about the top, the board of directors, your ED being informed. The goals and the entry strategies need to be trickled down throughout the organization. At every stage of your organization, each team member must understand how they contribute to those goals and what the strategy is, because at that stage you see higher productivity, you see more commitment and dedication in the operations as a whole. And to close off, as I look particularly at where Suriname and Guyana and the region are today, I believe that the opportunity for us is tremendous. The interest and investment is there, and what is important is to ensure that we are scaling and adapting to meet that interest and to take advantage of these opportunities. Particularly as a Chamber of Commerce, our responsibility is to ensure that governance and collaboration continue to evolve alongside our economies, so that this period of growth creates lasting value for businesses and people across the region. Thank you so much. I'll hand things over to Elizabeth once again.
All right. Thank you, Saudia. Saudia, thanks for the clarification in terms of your specific role. And I think that you have really taken the conversation in a little different direction, which I like, because I think Governance Week has really spanned across our region in terms of your speakers, our keynote speakers, our panelists. And I think Kamala has done a great job. CCGI has really done a great job in including persons from across our regions. So I'd like to pose a question to the panelists, and I'll start with you, Saudia. What governance practices can foster regional collaboration and prevent exclusionary practices within our region?
That is a tricky one, especially for me to answer. I think I've touched on collaboration quite a bit.
Yeah.
In terms of risk management, I think building investor confidence is quite key. A lot of local businesses are a bit protective of their practices, the way they've been doing things, the way they've been governed. And I think ensuring that they continue to understand the importance of being investor ready and fostering that confidence in their investors and potential partners is quite important. So I think a lot of work needs to be done at an institutional level as well to educate the market on that. And what that really does is governance is ultimately about creating that confidence to invest, to partner, to innovate, and navigating the development at this point in time on a regional level even. That is what will ensure that businesses are able to keep up, that they're able to mitigate the risks together. Through partnership and through knowledge sharing, as opposed to trying to stick to what has worked and what they assume will continue to work throughout this period.
All right, thank you. You know, one of the things that has always baffled me, we are part of CARICOM, but yet we have different regulations in every single territory, and that really prevents, someone going to do business in Suriname. You have a different regulation. You go to Barbados, it's a different regulation. So I always say we're not truly CARICOM, because CARICOM should have standardized regulations so that it makes it easier to move across borders to actually do business. Dereck, could we hear from you in terms of what governance practices can foster regional collaboration and prevent exclusionary practices?
Yeah, well, I think Saudia mentioned a few things. Education is number one, right? So we need to find a way. I mean, we have forums like this, and Kamala, they have done a great job at bringing a lot of regional players together. But there's still a lot to be done in terms of getting that education out there. hearing what different types of entities do. I mean, you've heard like almost 3 different perspectives from the panel today on different things. So sharing our respective experiences from different areas in the governance framework or in the governance structure is always very useful. But what you mentioned there is my pet peeve, where we have different things in this region. We're all small economies, and we really should be working close so that we can make things easier, make things more consistent across the region. And I've seen it not just in governance, but in other areas as well, in risk management and risk frameworks that are being implemented across the region. So I really think we need to get like the different associations in the different countries to talk to each other on a regional basis, and then to work with the regulators or whoever is responsible for getting us more consistency and more uniformity across the region.
All right, thank you. And I know that my background is insurance, and we've been struggling for years now to have one regulation. That has never happened. We've had a draft, and that's where it's at. And this is like 20 years ago, and we're still at the draft level. So each company wanting to operate in a different territory has to undergo different aspects of the regulation, which is sometimes completely different, between each other. All right, Sherice, any additional thoughts on the collaboration and regionally?
I think I want to bring it back to the corporate structure almost, where you have a group where you operate in multi jurisdictions. The way for your group to ensure that there is collaboration is to ensure that you have group-wide policies that apply to all of your entities, because there will be, you should be able to find the lowest common denominator and apply that across your group. Things like conflict of interest policies. There are certain things that should apply across your entire group, no matter where you operate, which jurisdiction within the region you operate. And if you have group-wide policies that apply all across the group, I think it would help to standardize the operations. I'm just going to give a few examples: conflict of interest policies, whistleblowing policies, anti-money laundering policies, data protection policies. You must have a code of conduct, ethical standards. There are things that you could do to overcome some of this, because we may never be able to find ourselves operating within the region using a standard set of regulations, but as multi-jurisdictional groups, corporate groups, there are things that we could do that could help us to standardize what we do within our group, and encourage that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sherice. Now, another question. I know structure and oversight is one of the big areas, and certainly one of the areas cited in this topic of the panel discussion here today. What mechanisms would ensure accountability across diverse industries within a group? Could we start with Saudia?
Sorry, Elizabeth, can you repeat that once more?
Okay.
Yeah.
What mechanisms ensure accountability across diverse industries within a group?
I think building on what Sherice was mentioning in terms of ensuring that there are policies outlined in every area, I think that is definitely beneficial for us. We definitely ensure that in dealing with companies across borders, partners, both in the public and private sector. It is very important that you have that structure established first within your own organization that guides all future conversations and all future strategies as you approach any challenges or disruptions that may come. So I am building off of Sherice there, but I do think it was quite the relevant point on this.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from?
One other thing I probably could add is board composition as well, right? So when you have diverse groups, you need to make sure that you're not constructing your board with too many specialists in one area, and your board should be able to understand the differences across the different industries or even the countries that you operate in. And if you can't get that at the board level, maybe strong committees that can then feed up to the board and advise the board, so that you always make sure you're managing your governance and your risks appropriately with the right information from the right people.
Kamala, how are we doing in terms of time and questions, or perhaps we should have some questions from their audience?
That's right.
I see Kevin has his hand up.
Yes, and so we are heading to the top of the hour, which gives us a half hour for Q&A.
Yeah.
But we can, in fact, open from now. Kevin did have a question from earlier, so we can invite him to unmute and to be brief, Kevin, in your comment and then question.
I have to keep brief in my vocabulary. Now, the reason why I'm asking this question is because I held the role of legal and compliance officer, legal manager, corporate secretary, and even now in an organization. And we were talking about cultural failures because that's a serious, real thing that happens abroad, all over. And as I made mention in the comment there that, when you're dealing with boards and you civic and whatever it is, for example, your parents own an organization, right? And they want to bring their children in and so on. Nothing is wrong with that. But if you don't know the role of a manager or a director and know the difference, right? This is an issue. And this is my question to all of you there, that when cultural failures occur in the organization, because it happens that causes you to fail and to lose and to shut down and all this kind of thing, who is to be held accountable and responsible for that?
Could we start with Dereck?
Well, I think it goes back to what quite a few speakers have said even earlier on, right? Everything starts with the top and tone at the top. Now, I mean, you reference specifically like family-run businesses, which are always going to be a bit challenging because the different generations may have different cultural differences, different ways of doing things. But that's why, even if it's family businesses or regular businesses, a strong board who really does push a certain type of culture, whether it's a governance culture, risk compliant culture to management, and then that has to filter all the way down. So one of the issues that I've kind of seen in the corporate world is that, yes, well, two things. One, people have a bit of difficulty defining what their culture is. So you have to figure that out, right? What is your culture from a governance perspective, from a risk perspective, and general corporate culture? And the other difficulty I've seen people have is really how do they cascade that through the organization? What is the mechanism? Is it through, town halls? Is it through email communications, newsletters? But it really should be something that is lived and demonstrated by people if they really buy into it. That's the best way to get culture through an organization. So if everybody buys in and you get everyone to contribute towards how you shape the business environment and culture, then I think that's one of the ways you could get more buy-in. So it starts at the top, but you should have participation from the wider organizational structure so that everybody feels like they've had a voice and they participated.
Thank you, Dereck. Saudia or Sherice, anything to add to what Dereck has responded to Kevin's question?
I would like to jump in here, actually, because I think that cultural issues don't always start at the top. If you have middle management that's undermining the board at the top, you could have as wonderful policies and you can pass them all down and you can have great directors who are fully qualified to do what they do. But if you have middle management undermining your group's culture, it'll destroy any policy, any structure that your board puts in place. I think I think the board has to be clear and has to be firm about what the culture is going to be. But you also have to put some of that responsibility at the feet of the middle managers as well. You have to pick the right people, and you have to make sure that your middle managers also understand what the group's culture is and what the board will or will not accept from them. Because again, those are the guys who are on the ground. They're the ones creating their little kingdoms.
Liz, I find that's a very interesting point that Sherice has made. And it's one we need to consider because in truth, a lot of organizations have very toxic cultures. and I have seen that boards really feel it has nothing to do with them, which is why I feel it really has to go back to the board, because the board has to set that tone. And then it means, therefore, the amount of work that is required of the board in terms of looking at reports to really check and find out whether the deliverables are being done in the way that you want, get feedback from your customers in terms of how your organization is performing, and then have the courage to act. Because if you have middle management that is undermining, you have a serious problem, and it has to be dealt with.
Well, the question I'd ask is, why is middle management undermining, right? So is it that they don't agree, or is it that the process wasn't participative enough, where people didn't feel like their voices were heard, right? So that's why one of the points I was making, to try to avoid that, and you could never, as you said, you could never really truly avoid every different type of person. But the more participative it is, and hopefully boards don't just make a decision on culture or anything without proper information and proper guidance. But hopefully by getting people to participate, they sort of feel like they had an influence on the culture, so they buy into it a bit more. But I agree. It's not always going to work as nicely as that, and you're going to have to figure out a way to find those elements and either get them out or change it.
I actually think it goes in the opposite direction as well, a lot of the times. Because in the cases, certainly my experience has been, directors come to board meetings 3 or 4 times a year. Outside of the board meetings and receiving the board papers, and depending on how fat the pack is, they complain or they don't. They don't really have anything to do with the organization, They only know what is presented to them 3 or 4 times a year. They're not involved. And selecting the right directors, people who are engaged, who are qualified to be directors, is such a significant point for any organization to make sure they get right. Because a lot of the times we may not necessarily pick the right people to be on your boards as well, Sometimes it may be family members. You talk about family-run organizations. Not every family member is suitable to be on the board, and so we do have to be very careful about the qualifications and the competence of our board members, because again, it goes to your point, it sets the tone. And if you get the right people who would engage and bring middle management in, but what happens is the board sometimes has a hands-off approach. They only get information when the board pack comes to them, and therefore middle management or management is just left to do whatever they want.
I think I can jump in here. Excellent points by everyone, but we also need to be courageous enough to reevaluate what isn't working. Is the board participation not working? Then perhaps we should have some balance and checks for what entails being a director, the level of participation needed, and should that be breached, then that director is liable to be replaced in some capacity. Secondly, balance and checks in the sense that do we have committees in place? Is middle management sabotaging because they don't feel like they have as much of a voice as they need? Then we need committees that enable participation at multiple levels of an organization where they're actively engaged in that conversation. And this can be committees to ensure welfare of employees and their satisfaction, but also at a deeper level as needed. Additionally, perhaps the structure of quarterly board meetings is not efficient enough in some organizations. Perhaps it needs to be monthly, especially for certain directors, maybe the treasurer, maybe the secretary, the chair, the vice chair. We cannot be, hesitant to adapt and to reevaluate what hasn't been working and to say we need more participation, we need more activity and more attention.
Yeah, I want to agree. Saudia, and if I may say, Sherice, so you can elaborate when I'm through, but I think 20 years ago, that system worked, but certainly after COVID, directors cannot say, I will meet once every quarter, just work on the board pack, and I have done my duty. That just does not work in today's world. So you're looking at competence of directors, their level of engagement, how they're even selected to ensure that you get the right fit. And then, as Robert shared earlier, they have to be constantly learning and want to understand. In fact, I recall one time reading from Professor Frank Kuhneman, and the first time I read this, I was quite taken aback. He said, if directors truly understood their duties, nobody would want to be a director.
Absolutely.
And I was thinking, I was like, really, is that true? Until I really started learning and understanding what the depths of being a director truly means. The responsibilities on you to ensure that you understand so that you can engage in proper oversight, that you could give strategic direction. But most times that does not happen. It really is left into the hands of management to a great extent. And boards are lucky if they have a good management team, if they happen to have, but most times they don't know until the crisis hits and the CEO ends up in the newspaper and you hear about, persons being charged, and then suddenly, they become aware that there was a problem all the while.
Right. I think Sherice did in her presentation spoke to understanding roles and responsibilities, and I've seen it. I've been, in one family-owned business where the directors walked in with their package not opened as yet, and I'm thinking to myself, I sat up all night going through my package, and I'm like, how can you really truthfully contribute if you're now opening the package? So, the responsibility also lies with directors. And I truly believe, too, that management should have an opportunity to sit at that board meeting to deliver their reports from time to time so directors get an understanding of who we have, especially for succession planning, who we have on board and how articulate are these individuals, how are we preparing them, to become directors at some point in time, how are we preparing them for the next level management? And that, to me, prevents the whole bit of silos and little kingdoms forming within an organization. It really helps them to feel that they have a voice, they have a seat at the table, and they're making, they're part of the decision making, and they're recognized for that. Because I think a lot of times it's those little things that really triggers these little silos. Am I adding any value to this organization? Am I being recognized for what I'm doing? Or am I just, just playing a part and not necessarily being recognized? But I think the responsibility really lies a lot with the board in terms of ensuring that management is involved at all levels. And that this really comes down, especially when you're doing the strategic planning exercises, that it has to start from the ground up, not from the top down, really from the ground up. All right, let me just go through some, any thoughts, anybody else?
Yeah, just one other thought. So in a past organization I worked for, they had a department that was named Culture and Human Resource, right? So it was actually not just human resources, it was culture and human resource. And there was a subcommittee of the board that was focused on that. So even though the board may not meet every month, the committee would meet more regularly, and then they would bring those issues to the board. So I think there's a way to bridge the gap somehow. It's just to find, I guess, what works in a particular organization or another, right? So then I've seen different ways that it was managed.
Right. Yes, there's a question from Anastasia in the chat list.
Let me see. Anastasia. All right. Her question is, do you think a good approach to operationally support the boards and committees in a group centralized legal governance and compliance, and which has oversight to all relevant activities across all entities? And that's one question. It's a big question. Do any of you have any sort of structure and thoughts on how effective this can be?
Okay, so is it that she's suggesting that maybe a good way to support the board and the committees is to form a group centralized legal governance and compliance hub?
I think that's it.
And therefore, will that solve some of our problems? What do you think, Sherice?
I think that there's certain functions that can be centralized that would help. Corporate secretarial functions being centralized would help. Compliance functions being centralized would help. Not everything. Maybe a group legal would help, but I don't think everything would lend itself to that. But it's an excellent suggestion, and I think it is one of the recommendations that I would make to a large group, that there are certain functions that should be centralized, and that's how you help to allow the flow of information as well. throughout the organization. But yes, I think that it is entirely a good suggestion.
All right. Any other thoughts from Dereck or Saudia?
The only other thing is maybe some of those functions could report directly to the board as well, or board committee rather. So it gives them more latitude and independence.
I think it's an excellent suggestion, especially for companies, like I said, operating across multiple borders. There are going to be so many differences, unfortunately, even throughout CARICOM. And there needs to be that body to lean on as you navigate each market and their regulations and their legislation individually.
Right. I see another question here. The CEO should always be present at board meetings, and somebody's, I guess, is it a question? Sherry-Ann is asking, should the CEO be present at all board meetings? If I'll throw it out to the panel first, and then I can give an opinion about that.
That's been my experience in most organizations. The CEO is present, and then some of the executives would come and present sections of their sections of the board report. So I think that's pretty common, and hopefully it's common. But if it's not, yes, that's how it should be.
Yeah.
I would imagine that is unless there's an issue that the board wants to discuss.
You will have a private meeting.
Yes, that you don't want the CEO present because it has something to do with the CEO. But
yeah,
outside of that, yeah.
But I also think that there are times when after a board meeting or prior to a board meeting that the board should have some conversation about the way the company is going without the presence of the CEO. Not that you're thinking of the CEO of less capable, but you certainly need to, as a board, review some critical things that's happening in the organization. Do we have the right fit for the CEO? Are we really getting what we need to get in terms of reports from the CEO, or certainly the whole aspect of the CEO's role and responsibilities? I think that, it behoves the directors to have that private conversation and perhaps structure things so that they can get more information, or certainly be aware of things that are happening. Because I've known of many boards, I can tell you, many boards where the CEO controls the board.
Absolutely.
The CEO controls the board. So, I mean, sometimes like friends are telling me, it's like, how come that happening? And, the board is looked at as just a pack jokers in some organizations. And I know right now, right here in Guyana, the employees are like, they're just accepting everything the CEO has said without even questioning it. And it, to me, have distanced themselves really from what is really happening in the company, as it were. So, do we have any other questions?
There's a comment from Christina, actually, and we could ask her to unmute because she shared quite a few there based on her experience.
Sure, please, Christina, Jackie, if you can unmute and share your thoughts.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Only to say really that I am part of a financial services group of companies in which the legal compliance and governance units are centralized, and we operate in various jurisdictions regionally, not internationally. So there is some level of centralization. However, what I have found is that sometimes the centralization may or may not help. And I totally agree with the panel in terms of culture, because I think culture is really driven through management and not necessarily through the board, at least from what I've seen. And generally, depending on when the board gets appointed, if it's through political appointments, it tends to be that the board gets changed every so often when the government mandate changes, so that they're not on long enough to really, how to put it, have an impact then on culture. But in terms of what someone might have said with respect to the CEO, I mean, everyone is different and everything is different, but we actually have a situation where the CEO is mandated to attend each meeting. And I can tell you that that has not augured very well for productivity, because the reality of the matter is that we have over 200 meetings every year. Whether the issue is meeting management and perhaps we're meeting too often, or maybe there's a different issue we need to talk about, but I can definitely see it impacting productivity, where a CEO is in meetings all day, every day, and then nothing gets done. So just sharing from my perspective, it may not be as black and white as we anticipate, because different groups dictate different things, and there's different expectations and requirements all around. And then, of course, different factors. So when you have a board changing every 5 years, that's a consideration. When you have a CEO perhaps who may not have as much executive support, so then that person is inundated with meetings. So it varies. So really just what I wanted to share.
Christine, I just want to clarify. So, having 200 meetings for the year, you mean that as a group? So it's from different the subsidiaries as well, and
Yes.
then this is a group CEO who is
Yes.
mandated to be present at each of those.
That's correct. Yes.
Oh, well, I don't understand how that CEO could function.
No.
Yes. As well as in the region too. So there's travel, so there's the travel element and so on. So factoring all of that, it's like, okay, when does the CEO get time to do his job?
Yes.
I would probably I would venture a guess to say that situation is unusual. It's probably not, most groups are probably not as large as yours. So probably not, but it's something that is probably critical for your organization to have a look at, to be honest. I want to jump in on that CEO discussion because I've been on both sides of this. I've chaired the board. I've been a director on the board. I've kind of looked on. When I'm the chairman, I want the CEO in the room because I want him to be able to answer all the questions. But sometimes there are things I just don't. I feel he's trying to control the board. He's trying to control the narrative. He's trying to control the way that the information is presented to the board. And so I've really been on both sides of that argument. And I would have to say, if I had to come down on one side, I would say I want the CEO in the room. However, I sat on the board of a university in New York for a number of years. A part of our agenda was an executive session where the management left the room, and it was a part of everybody knew that this was a part of the agenda. We went into executive session where the management left the room, and the board alone were able to discuss the matters that we felt necessary. We may say, well, there's nothing left. It doesn't matter. The point is that it was a part of the set agenda, and it was a part of the expectation of everyone, including the CEO and the rest of the managers who were in the room, that they had to leave. And it may not be a bad thing for companies to adopt as part of the set agenda that there will be an executive session where the management leaves. Because we do it with our auditors. When the auditors come into the room, we ask the management to leave. It's a part of the set agenda. We want to ask the auditors, is there anything you want to tell us as the board? It may not be a bad thing to suggest, as set it up and so expectations are set from the beginning.
Yes, I like that, Sherice, because you're right. Maybe there's sometimes nothing more to discuss, but just in case there is, you now have the room to be able to vent that, raise it, and suddenly you may discover that there is an issue that needs to be looked at.
Okay, Dereck, I have a particular interest in enterprise risk management, and while I'm directing this question to you, the other panelists could also jump in. We're talking about conglomerates, we're talking about family-owned businesses that has different subsidiaries. So I was wondering, how can conglomerates balance enterprise risk management with subsidiary-specific risks? Like, for instance, I'm part of the role group in the insurance part, but there are multiple entities that's not related to financial services. I just want to get your feedback on that.
Yeah, so what I've seen done is some conglomerates or some financial groups have opted to create different structures. So you have a financial group and then you have a non-financial group, right? And then you have an overall group board that kind of looks at everything. That's actually becoming a requirement in some places. So like, for example, in Jamaica, financial holding companies now need to be segregated from, like if you have a real estate arm or something else. So what we've seen happening is the creation of financial holding companies to manage the financial aspects of the group. The good thing is financial regulations across the region is a bit similar. Not exactly similar. There are nuances, but it is kind of along the same principles. So it's a little bit easier to manage on the financial side. The non-financial, you need different skill sets there for sure, right? And then at the group board level, you have sort of a mix of both financial, non-financial, so that you can have discussions that impact the entire group, and everyone can contribute there. From a risk management perspective, though, one of the things I think that really helps is you need to have some element of a centralized risk management framework. So like if your operation, you should have like a group risk sort of team, even if you have individuals. So one of the past, or a couple of the companies I worked for, we had a group risk team. You had individual risk teams in different jurisdictions, and that's where the element of, I had mentioned, dotted lines versus solid lines, tend to come into play. But there must be some centralized way to gather all the different risks that are being faced throughout the financial and non-financial structure, so that there's some centralized risk management team, or if it's a chief risk officer type role, can consolidate that, understand what's going on in different parts of the group, and make sure that you're responding appropriately, right? So that then gets fed up to the different boards and to the group board. So that's sort of a structure that we see that helps bring everything together, because as you know, one risk in one place could lead to a risk somewhere else, or it could just escalate. So there must be somebody responsible for taking that consolidated view and then feeding it up to whether it's a financial holding company board or group level board. There must be that centralized gathering of risk intelligence and risk, all the different risks that the group faces.
Thank you. Great response. Saudia or Sherice? Saudia, you want to add anything to that?
Sorry, my mind is still on the previous thing, if I could tie that in.
Sure.
Ensuring that there are task teams or task forces for the individual needs, like Dereck has just mentioned, to consult directly. But also we need to ensure, like Sherice was saying, and Kamala, that CEO in that position that Christina was just talking about, that they're not spread that thin, that they're simply a placeholder or a message. Yeah. Perhaps at that time, it is better to hear from the task team or the relevant department and managers themselves, to have them have a seat at the table, and then perhaps, have them exit for that executive session. So that's where my thoughts were on just now.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for those thoughts as well. Sherice,
one second, Liz. I see Robert has unmuted and his camera is on. Did you want to add a thought, Robert?
I just wanted to share my experience, and it actually came from BP when I went to London. We had enterprise risk frameworks, and you could argue that an oil and gas company across the world is quite similar, but there were some quite distinct pieces. For example, a lot of people may not know, but for example, we had a trading floor. So we did a lot of trading. We had a lot of finance issues around that. In fact, some big risks. And the bottom line point I want to point out is that you can't aggregate risk in a conglomerate or in a diversified business by just in a sort of an additive way. That's very dangerous. So, for example, you might have a business, say like Massey, where we have an energy sector with particularly high process safety risks, which the rest of the group does not really have in that way. There may be something in food. What you have to be careful to do is that as those risks get, in a sense, aggregated for main board discussion, the holdings board, is that you decide quite deliberately in your risk framework that safety risk, industrialized kind of heavy, could blow the company up if you had 10, 20 people dying on a plant. That risk needs to come all the way up to the board. It's not, in a sense, consolidated or averaged out in the way that you might do sums or statistics or something. You have to be really, really deliberate about that there are certain risks which, by their very definition, you've decided as a board or as an entity will always come to the main board. So it won't be aggregated away. As you know, in finance, that's also a challenge, because you could have financial results that are so aggregated that you can't actually see where which part of the entities are really holding their own and which are not. It's the same thing with risk. You have to be really, really careful. And then the other thing that I have observed that's very distinguished from the Fortune 250 companies is that they literally develop an arm of the entity that spends its time doing assurance. So it's not just audit, which tends to be people who are very equipped with finance. But for example, in my group, which was called S&OR, Safety and Operating Risk, we actually, I ran the whole enterprise risk system for BP, but we fed in the safety and operating risks into the enterprise risk. But I had thousands of people who their job was to observe, to go to check, to assure. So that we built in for some risks they're so technical that the language, the thinking, the operating, process safety is a very complex risk to talk about if you're not been engineering. So to kind of bring that in, you have to bring it in with technical expertise who come right to the board. And then the final point I'd make is you have to be careful that in giving so much authority and access by technical people and that you're not taking the accountability hat away from the person who has to manage the risk. So if you say this business has this risk and you say that person has to manage it, the fact that you have a second line of defense and a third line of defense, it has to be really clear when that risk is being talked about and managed that it's that person, that first line that has the primary accountability to make sure that risk is managed and mitigated or not.
Yeah.
If I can touch on that quickly, because that's an excellent point, and we see a lot of times it being a communication issue when it gets to the board level. And I think a lot of that stems from the technical persons who understand what the issue is, what they're proposing to mitigate that risk. They are not necessarily having a seat at the table to explain that. Perhaps they cannot explain that in non-technical terms. So I think there really needs to be a balance in that communication in somebody who can explain that technically. Take, for example, it's a cybersecurity risk. The wider board who is not, versed in that field and that industry, they're not going to understand the depth of that risk. So you need that technical person there. You also need somebody to really bolster that person's argument and to really supplement it with the language that would be more digestible by a wider board or, the committee making decisions to mitigate that.
It's a really good point. If I could come back in, because I could say this now. In a sense, what people don't know about the post-BP Macondo experience was that almost 40% of our operating leadership were changed out. And the real reason for that was that we found that we had gone too far in having commercial business people leading heavy engineering businesses, where the truth is they could not truly understand the engineered perspective on particularly things like process safety. So there comes a point if you're running a business that has so much heavy industry, high risk things to run, where there's very technical that you may need to consider the composition of the board as well. So there's a point at which it can't be dumbed down and understood. So you need to have somebody there on the board that can really truly understand and support, the language. Process safety, high engineering, high IT stuff often runs that kind of dilution that, business people feel, well, I'm a business person, therefore. But translating the risk often needs that technical person sitting on boards. So sometimes if you have in BP, you will see that if you look at the board, for example, there's a lot more engineers in there now than there used to be, simply because people have accepted it's an engineering business. And sometimes you have a business like that, and you need to have some of that representation right up at the top. It's not just all commercial.
Thank you, Robert. One last question that I had that I thought of to ask the panel, and perhaps Professor Bob Card might add and Robert might add into. What are your views on the number of in terms of subsidiaries, how many boards should an individual be on? Because there are subsidiaries where persons are on every single board. And my thought of the process on that is that how can they really truly contribute to effectively being, on several boards? So what are your idea in terms of the number of boards should one be on in a conglomerate, one individual? So if I can start with Dereck.
I think I see Sherice raring to go there. I feel you should get Sherice first.
Sherice,
I'm only laughing. I'm laughing because I live in the Cayman Islands where the concept of independent directors is quite common, and there's an argument that always happens here. How many boards can one person sit on? We have people here who have 300 or 400 boards in their portfolio. And I think it really depends on what the companies are doing. It depends on how active your companies are. If you have a subsidiary that's not active, it just holds some assets and it doesn't do anything. Or it may be just a holding company for shares. If it's not active, you can justify it. But it's not one size fits all. If you have entities that are very active, I don't think there's a rule of thumb. It depends. I think you have to always say that the director needs to act in the best interest of each of the companies that he is or she's a director of. And they need to be able to carry out their role properly and effectively. And so I don't think there's no right answer to your question.
Yeah, and then the other thing.
Depends on each director.
Yeah, and then the other thing that happens is sometimes you may have a mix of professionals who might be also working and some who might be not working. So maybe retired and stuff. So that's a hard question because I agree with the answer. It has to be what the individual thinks they can manage without diluting their contribution. So if you have more time and you could participate in 10 boards, okay, once your contribution is meaningful. But if you're on different boards and different entities and so on, or even working, running a business yourself, that time may not be, you may not be able to sit on as many boards. So I would leave it to a similar answer. It's where the individual can contribute effectively without, just being overburdened and not being able to contribute or not participating at all in some cases.
Liz, we just have 2 more minutes. Just quick time check. We have 2 more minutes.
Yes, I know. I saw that. All right, Saudia, if not, Saudia, you want to add anything to that discussion in terms of the number of boards?
Minding the time, I do think it is indeed quite subjective, and it begs the question, are you identifying the scope of the directorship enough per subsidiary? I think that's very important. Is that person just there because, or are you really identifying how they're actively contributing to each subsidiary?
Okay, all right. So one last takeaway from each one of you based on our discussions today. If you'd like to leave with the audience, Saudia, I'll start with you, seeing that you're on the floor right now.
I think my presentation was quite regional. So I think what I would like to enforce based on my thoughts is the importance of culture, again, knowing, identifying, outlining your own business culture first and foremost. And as you explore additional markets, in understanding what culture you are going to be adapting to and incorporating into your group, your organization going forward, and really keeping an open mind and evaluating at all levels how that will be effectively incorporated.
All right. Thank you, Saudia. And thank you for switching to the regional conversation. You brought that out. Sherice, any final thoughts?
Yep. 3 things. Number 1, COVID was good for some things. It was bad for other things. Zoom board meetings should not be allowed. I don't like it. I find directors who participate by Zoom, 9 times out of 10, halfway through the board meeting, they turn off their camera because they're no longer paying attention. Okay. Board evaluations should be done on a regular basis. Okay. Honest evaluations. It should become a part of the culture of the organization. And the third thing is succession planning is a huge responsibility of the board. So many times we leave it to the management and we don't look at it as a board. It's probably one of the biggest responsibilities of the board. And finally, one size doesn't fit all. Look at your organization. different things apply to you.
Excellent parting points. Dereck, we're
Well,
1
I'll
minute over
just
time.
no, so I'll keep it brief. Remember my opening comment, right? Everybody thinks they have a plan until they get punched in the face. So don't allow yourself to have situations where you're surprised by something. Always look at your organization critically, try to plan, try to think of scenarios, try your best to prepare for what the unexpected may bring. So, just as much preparation as possible, and that helps to manage those stress situations and unexpected events.
All right, thank you, panelists. I think this was quite a robust discussion. We, over the past several days, we've been talking about different things. Yesterday, we spoke a lot about family-owned businesses, but I think today really brought home conglomerates and even family-owned businesses and what are some of the things we really should be looking for. So thank you, panelists, Dereck, Sherice, and Saudia, for your very interesting deliberations. And Kamala, thank you again for allowing me to moderate this session. And it's back to you.
Thank you so much, Liz. And thanks very much to Sherice, her first time here with us at CCGI. Quite brilliant, some of the contributions that we had. Thank you, Dereck. And Saudia, you too. I loved it. I wish I had time to also ask you about the relationship between the Guyanese and the Surinamese on the board and that culture that's been built. So we have to invite you another time as well. So, but I think yes, one of the things this panel really brought out for us too is that our region is small, but it's certainly very complex. And so we may take it for granted. Some of us we speak the same language, and it's easy to just get on a plane and a 1.5 away we are in another territory. But it's very complex, and the volatile arrangement environment is not helping. So we definitely have to be thinking about how we can improve our governance practices so that we can remove some of those obstacles that have been talked about. So a lot of work for us to do in time to come. We are out of time already, so I'm going to ask Quantrell if he can have the sponsors thank you video on. We'll go straight to that, and then I'll close off with what our next panel will be discussing, and we go on a short break. Quantrell, are you ready? Thank you so much. So we have just concluded panel 1, governance at scale, oversight across complex group structures, and we certainly identified a lot of the issues that one need to consider with these groups.